Okay, we're going to get started here in about 1 minute, folks. I want to thank you. Thank Max Orr for that wonderful talk on the Barbary pirates. I don't know where he ran off to, but executive director has come back on board here. Folks, I just wanted to let you know that we are coming up on the end of our fiscal season. We end on June 30th and start. And I know you folks here have paid a not insignificant tuition to come to today's event, and we thank you for prioritizing learning on a Saturday and coming out and spending the money to get that ticket. I do want to let you know, though, that most of the activities that Carolina Public Humanities does, most of the things like our K-12 teacher workshops, all of our outreach to community colleges and institutions around the state, are free of charge for everyone. And we use this, some of these seminars are great ways for us to reach the public, but we do need as much support as we can get, especially for our teachers who are woefully under-resourced, and to give them the great scholarship that they need. We have a teacher workshop coming up at the end of June, in which we'll have 35 teachers coming to learn from UNC scholars. Another one coming up in the end of July, 35 teachers coming. We put them up in wonderful, we treat them like the kings and queens they should be treated and all of that takes money. So if you folks are interested in supporting Carolina Public Humanities, in your packets here, you have some information on how you can support us. We have different funds that you can support. And we just want to say thank you for considering donating to Carolina Public Humanities, knowing that donations of any size are greatly appreciated and all donations are tax deductible. So that was my act of piracy today, today here. But let us get right into the star of the show. Listen, I want to be honest. When we were looking for experts on pirates, the first person we thought of was Charlie Ewen. And then we said, well, then who else can we pair with them? We're like, and then they got stuck with me. But as you can see, I'm not going to read the whole bio, but Dr. Ewen has been working on archaeology, and especially archaeology of nautical sites, for decades. He is the author of the first, or editor or author of the first, would you call it pirate archaeology book, Pieces of Eight. X marks the spot, Pieces of Eight, and a new one coming up called Dead Man's Chest. But probably more impressive is the fact that just this week, and was it even this morning you were on site? Okay. Last night. So he's in the middle of a dig right now in Brunswick. Maybe he'll share some information and taking time out of actually getting down in the dirt and learning more about the past to come and talk about a little bit with us today. Been working on pirates for decades. We have a lot to learn. And I also just want to thank Dr. Ewen also for having been at our teacher workshops and having worked with our Carolina K-12 community. So he can testify how great these events are. But he's not going to do that now. He's going to talk about pirates. So without further ado, please welcome Dr. Charles Ewen.
Thank you, Max. It's going to be a little bit different. I'm an archaeologist, and I'll be taking more of an anthropological perspective on this, although you'll get your history stuff as well. I'm a historical archaeologist. And as Max said, I was just in the field yesterday. I'll be back in the field tomorrow. But this is a nice snacks, not peanut butter and jelly. It's air conditioned. They said, why would you do this in the middle? I'm thinking, why would I not do something like this? I had originally entitled this Everything You Wanted to Know About Pirates But Were Afraid to Ask, knowing that you all would probably get the allusion to it. But I talked to a lot of school groups and they have no idea, and I feel awkward explaining that to them, so I don't. So I retitled it for that. What I'm going to talk about is going to complement a lot of what Max talked about and kind of go into more, like I said, anthropological, archaeological perspective on this. So I want to start. When Max started defining what the alleged piracy, and honestly, sitting over there, I really didn't see much piracy. It was all privateering. Well, here, we'll just start with that. So what is a pirate? There we go. Oops, did I go too fast? Okay, yeah, we'll go back. Buccaneer. There's all these different terms: buccaneer, privateer, pirate, corsair. Are they all the same thing? No, they are not. but they're all kind of different. Buccaneer is kind of fun. My doctoral dissertation was working on a Spanish colonial site, 16th century, on the north coast of Haiti. And why is Hispaniola today half French, half Spanish? It used to be all Spanish. It was all called Hispaniola. And then the Spanish could not control smuggling that was going on. And so they just made everybody leave the western third of the island, and they all moved to what becomes the Dominican Republic. And French smugglers move in and start squatting on the land. The Spanish left a lot of cattle who had become feral and large and were everywhere. And these French would catch these cattle. They would smoke them on grills called boucans and sell the smoked meat to passing ships. And the folks that ran the boucans were boucaniers, which gets, anglicized into buccaneers, because as we'll see with pirates, they're not full-time pirates, most of them. These guys, smoked meat salesmen, and then a really nice ship with stuff in it goes by and they go, yeah, let's not sell them anything and let's just take stuff from them. So that's kind of where the origin of buccaneers come. And think of them as sort of a proto-pirate, if you will. And this next one, and this is what I really think Max was, from what little I know now, I know a lot more than I did about the Barbary pirates, but I'm thinking they're more the Barbary privateers. It doesn't really roll off the tongue as well, but it's all a matter of perspective. There's a rock band called Linkin Park, and in one of their songs, they talk about piracy as a matter of perspective, and they brought it into kind of the modern world, but it is. This here is Francis Drake, Sir Francis Drake, knighted by the Queen. If you had talked to the Spaniards at the time, at the end of the 17th century, it would have been El Drac, and he would have been a story that you would have told your children to go to bed, or El Drac will get you. He was a terrible pirate. So it's a matter of perspective. He sacked towns, he took ships, but they're all Spanish towns and all Spanish ships, and he did it because he had a letter from the English crown to do so. And privateers are actually where a lot of pirates, when we get to pirates, get their starts. They're raiding things. And honestly, the American Navy during the Revolution was mostly privateer. We really didn't have much of a Navy until I don't know, the war against the Barbary pirates, I suppose, really kind of makes that all start to happen. In 4th, 5th grade, you hear about old Ironsides and stuff like that. That was kind of the exception to the rule. It was mostly, getting folks, and what's not to like? You're fighting for your country and you get to steal everything that, that you capture. So I think a lot of piracy, even when I'm going to talk about it now, is more privateering. So what is a pirate? There we go. Interesting. You had this picture up there, but he had this kind of fuzzy hat on, and I've seen that one, but it's Blackbeard. And so this woodcut has a lot of different variations depending on which version of Charles Johnson's book on the history of pirates that you look at. A pirate was against everybody. And as such, everybody was against him. And if you were caught and convicted of piracy, it was an instant death sentence. So, not a good thing. And sometimes they didn't just kill you, but they put your body in a cage and hung it out in front of the harbor as a warning to other, what happened to Captain Kidd, what happens to other pirates that, if you're thinking that way of moving into the branch of piracy, I recommend against it. And especially after you hear how unromantic the lives really probably were. So, and Piracy was the problem. We'll talk about the golden age of piracy, which was the last 25 years of the 17th and about the first 25 years of the 18th century. Why was it? And I remember when I was proposing a course on the archaeology of the Caribbean, one of the, you have to turn in the syllabus and do all this other stuff, as most of you all know. And I had a week on the golden age of piracy, and one of the historians at ECU said, golden age of piracy, what the hell was that? And I went, oh, it's a real thing. I'm not making it up. And it was. And piracy flourishes where there's a weak government. And if there's no one to suppress it, then that's where we get it. And that's where we see it today, where they're really, Somalia is on the other side of the world, and there's really no Somali government per se to police it. And it's actually more expensive for our government to go do that, but we've done a little bit of it. Now I'll talk more about them in a little bit. So, but there's, and I'm glad to find out more about what corsairs were. When you talk about corsairs, you're usually talking about Barbary pirates, or piracy along, or privateering, I guess, along North Africa. There's also freebooters and swashbucklers, and there's a lot of other things that we could throw in that would go with piracy. But privateers and pirates are the two kind of big categories to think about. In this book that's coming up, what is it again? Dead Man's Chest, that's right. I think I'd remember these things. Dead Man's Chest, Exploring the Archaeology of Piracy. One of the authors that contributed a chapter has something called pirateers. And I didn't like that, and I tried to talk him out of it, but he was keen on it. And he says it's pirates that sometimes are officially working for the government, but then that was all of them, pretty much. But we left it in because there is a blending between piracy and privateers. Privateering is basically a gateway into piracy. You know, the Blackbeard's a good example, was a privateer, and then hostilities ceased, but he wasn't done. And even though England said, yeah, we're not going to prey on Spanish shipping anymore, there were a lot of folks that said, well, yeah, we are. So that's kind of my spin on piracy. Some pirate myths, and we'll talk about the origins of the myths in a minute, but there's some things that, and I think most of you are probably aware of this, walking the plank. I didn't know what the origin of that was, and it's out of, there's this book I've already mentioned once, Captain Charles Johnson, in General History of Pirates, and there's a couple of, and it's 1724, and that's where we get a lot of our information about pirates. That's where Robert Louis Stevenson got a lot of his information about pirates. It's contemporary with with piracy at the time, but we're not even sure who Captain Charles Johnson was. And I'll talk more about him in a moment. But he described ancient swashbucklers in the Mediterranean running a ship's ladder out over waves and telling their Roman captives they're free to go as long as they're willing to swim for it. But there is no proof that pirates ever did this, certainly not in the 17th and 18th century. This is a Howard Pyle is my favorite pirate artist. In fact, I have a book, Howard Pyle's Big Book of Pirates. I think it's all I've had it since I was 5. And stuff like that never happened that we're aware of. Marooning them, maybe keel hauling them, but walking the plank is something that Charles Johnson does, and then it gets picked up later by fiction writers, and we think, they did that. Burying treasure. This is another one, and this is something that no one can get away from. Pirates burying the treasure. I do some popular things from time to time. They ask me, I get these nice scholarly gigs where people like Max ask me to come and talk like the professor I am. But then I also get calls from television shows, and I just I was contacted to be on History's Greatest Mysteries with Lawrence Fishburne. And no, I did not get to meet Lawrence Fishburne. But they said, we're doing an episode on Blackbeard's buried treasure. We'd like you to be on it. And I said, Blackbeard didn't bury any treasure. I said, no pirates really did. And they go, well, we've got, I said, I don't care what you have, there is no recorded evidence of a pirate ever burying treasure except for Captain Kidd. And he buried a small cache. He was being pursued by Governor Bellamont at New York. He stopped on Gardiner's Island, buried treasure, took off. It was recovered and used against him in his trial, and he was hung. And that is seriously the only, as far as I know, that's the only instance, recorded instance, of a pirate burying treasure. So I told this to the producers of History's Greatest Mysteries, and they said, huh. Well, we're pretty sure he had, so I said, and I'm pretty sure the other way. I said, if I can be the skeptical voice of reason, of course, I'll go on it. Because I will tell you, half hour on that show, I reach more people than all my books. 1 million people watch that. And if I can get some of them to say, huh, maybe I'll read one of his books, then I'm ahead. There's just no evidence of them burying treasure. So these two big things, and also, once again, Robert Louis Stevenson, Treasure Island, burying treasure. I mean, that's the whole book practically on that. So we'll dispel a couple of these. And as long as I'm dispelling myths about buried treasure, another thing I do, another class I teach at East Carolina is one that I made up called Aliens, Atlantis, and Archaeology, Pseudoscience and Interpreting the Past, where I look at these fantastic claims in archaeology, and we use some I could have called it critical thinking in archaeology, but no one would take that. Throw Aliens and Atlantis in the title, and it fills every time. So, and I spend a week on reality television, and one of the things I talk about is the Curse of Oak Island. Has anyone seen the Curse of Oak Island? It's okay if you have. You don't just say, yeah, and I hate it. It's terrible. Yeah. The first scene was okay. It's supposedly two boys in the end of the 18th century were looking out from Nova Scotia to Oak Island, and they see a light bobbing around, and they go out and they find a branch from a tree with a rope and a pulley hanging from it and this large circular depression. And so they start digging, and they come down and hit a platform at 10 feet, and they dig some more, and they hit another platform at 10 feet, and they, and over a couple of days they dig another, and they don't find anything, but they're sure there's something, and it just keeps going and going, and it's supposedly where Captain Kidd buried his treasure. And the Curse of Oak Island is going to this place here called the Money Pit, and it truly is, in every sense of the word, a money pit, because millions have, I don't care if it is chock full of Captain Kidd's gold. It will never repay how much money has been spent looking for it. And you wouldn't believe it. Franklin Delano Roosevelt was ready to go dig for pirate treasure. This World War II thing kind of got in the way, and he was distracted, and so he didn't. John Wayne, Errol Flynn, a lot of these folks wanted again. Now it's a series. After the first season of Curse of Oak Island, they were pretty close. The second season, they're sick with pirate treasure. So there's other stuff in the Money Pit. The Knights Templar, that's a red flag. If the Knights Templar are ever invoked, you know it's pseudoscience. But there's supposed to be Shakespeare's lost plays, the Ark of the Covenant, the Holy Grail, you name it, it's down there. And so they're on season 10. They're extra close now. And when I give my lecture, and I have like a whole class, hour-long lecture just on Oak Island, I asked the class if they've seen it, and no, but my dad has. And I said, well, here's how to wreck Thanksgiving, this time. And so anyways, but everybody wants there to be pirate treasure. even if I'm telling you this, you still think, well, maybe it's not recorded, and they did that. So let's talk about where we get our image of piracy, because no matter how much, and I can tell you this, I've been looking at this a long time, no matter how many books I read, if I think about piracy, I'm thinking about Treasure Island. And I'm thinking about the real Treasure Island. When we had our daughters, I said, I'm going to read them. I'm going to read them great classic books. So I got the original Robert Louis Stevenson Treasure Island. I'm reading them going, wow, this is kind of dark. I think we'll get the Disney version for the girls, and so, but it is published in 1883. And another one of my favorite artists, N.C. Wyeth, has it's great illustrations in if you get the original editions. It is followed in 1902 by Peter Pan, which originally starts out as a series of short stories in a magazine called the Little Bird, I think. Is it the Little Bird or the Blue Bird? The Little White Bird. And it incorporates people from Treasure Island into Peter Pan. Then, of course, Hollywood needs to get involved. And here is probably the greatest pirate movie of all time. Anyone recognize it? Captain Blood, Errol Flynn, you bet. And to me, it's all downhill from there. The piracy genre is, ugh. Although I will say, now I'm sure they've sanitized it by now. I've not been back to Disney World. But when I went to Disney World when I was younger, Pirates of the Caribbean, my favorite ride, the original movie, I liked it. And they just got worse and worse after that. Just like all these serials. But, and that's 2004. Can you believe it? It's been that long since that came out. 2003. Captain Blood was 1935, just to kind of put it all in perspective. And but they all go back to Robert Louis Stevenson. And when we think about it, we think of hooks. We think of, from Peter Pan. We think of patches. We think of parrots. We think of skulls and crossbones. All of these things, no matter how far we get away from it. Dave Barry. Actually, and this is actually, we don't get time off from school or anything like that, but September 19th, it's not just National Talk Like a Pirate Day, it's International Talk Like a Pirate Day. And I will say that on the 19th, if I'm teaching a class, I'll teach it as a pirate. It's exhausting, and I just hope, that it doesn't fall on a Tuesday or Thursday this year. So, and I will say on September 19th, this is a few years ago, I'm at my office and the phone rings and I answered, this be Dr. Ewen's speaker piece or walk the plank. And it was a lawyer from about some archaeological thing, and I went, yeah, okay, I'm sorry. So you got to be careful talking like that. And interestingly enough, of course, I'm at East Carolina University, home of the pirates. I was actually interested in doing pirate archaeology before I got here. And no, it played no part in my taking the job here. There was a job, and I needed one, and I took it. It was just sort of happenstance that this whole pirate thing has come together. And you'd think they'd make a bigger deal out of it, but I'll talk more about that. So, as I'm talking, they're talking about our mascots. And once again, all these pirates, there's a lot of, the Oakland Raiders, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Pittsburgh Pirates, there's, I don't know how many college pirates there are, but there's Petey, that's one of our meaner, but he's usually a little happier and things like that. And so, we even have in Greenville, we have a merchants association, and their motto is pirates supporting pirates. Think about it. I mean, really, you're a merchant and you're advocating piracy. It does make no sense whatsoever. So that's where we get all the imagery. And and one Halloween, I know everybody's pretty civilized here in Chapel Hill, but in Greenville, they go wild at Halloween. And there's this apartment complex not far from where I live. In fact, I can hear it from my house. And 2014, party going out of bounds. It was rocking buses, people climbing on light poles, throwing beer bottles at people, and scrambled a lot of police and stuff. And in the news in the evening, they had the chancellor at the time, Steve Ballard, and he comes out and he goes, "This is not how pirates behave." And I'm thinking, no, this is exactly how pirates behave. So we're seeing this sort of idea, but to segue into it, really, pirates were terrorists. And that's how they made their living. No one, since they were against everybody, no one was safe from attack. During the golden age of piracy, about 3,000 ships were taken. That's a lot back then. It's a lot today. That's why, if you were convicted, it carried an instant death sentence. And I'm talking about the policing of stuff. The one thing that the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise gets right, who were the villains? If you're watching Pirates of the Caribbean, who are the bad guys? It's not the pirates. It's not the Navy. The Navy are the tools of the bad guys. The businessmen, the East India Company. And why they're the bad guys? Because they don't like pirates. In fact, this is the only way piracy, this is what causes the end of the golden age of piracy, is you have merchants wanting to do business in the Caribbean and North America, going to the Crown and saying, we can't do business, we're losing shipping, and you're losing taxes. And the Crown said, that's terrible. We need to do something. And that invokes a greater naval presence. And so that's how these things are put down. So that's when you're talking about true piracy, you're talking in about areas that don't have a strong naval presence that can enforce the law on the sea. And we'll see that it moves. Once it's suppressed in the Caribbean, these guys go elsewhere. And the Indian Ocean, east coast of Africa, Madagascar becomes a pirate haven. It starts out on the north coast of Haiti at Ile de la Tortuga Island, moves into the Bahamas, and then goes over to Madagascar. It's always kind of going on, except I'm not calling it piracy again in the Mediterranean, but anywhere that there's robbery at sea, you've got pirates. Make the connection between piracy then and now. I love this. This is the Howard Pyle one, where a lot of your pirates were in small boats. They may have a mothership that they go back to, but they would attack a lot of times from these small boats. And look at it today. This is sometimes they have these Zodiac rubber boats, but these small boats, and they're attacking big tankers. I like that because you get the whole thing. And I think that if you want a real corollary of what it was like to be a pirate in the Caribbean, I think you only need to look at Somalia. I don't think it was a short life but a merry one, as Bartholomew Roberts said. I think that it was a short life and a miserable one. I don't get to use the terms South Park and poignancy in a sentence the same very often, but there is an episode of South Park where they go over, the kids decide they want to be pirates, and Cartman says, yeah, I know where to go be a pirate, and they go over to Madagascar, and at the end, everybody gets killed except the kids, and it ends just like, oh, well, that's what I expected in a cartoon. So I think for most pirates, you get some of the high profile folks like Henry Morgan or Henry Every or Blackbeard or something like that. If I was going to be a pirate, Henry Morgan would be my role model. He collected a lot, ended up, you know, the lieutenant governor of Jamaica, and died of gout. You know, that's how I want to go. Rich living would finish me off. But that's not most pirates. And Max and I were talking about this earlier. Most pirates didn't have that as a full-time job. We saw with the buccaneers trading smoked meat. Oh, there's a ship with a lot of stuff on it, and there's more of us than them. In our first book, X Marks the Spot, we have a contributor who wrote a chapter about these logwood cutters in Honduras, where they're cutting this type of wood that would be used for making dye. And that's got to be a crappy job. I mean, you're in the jungle cutting this wood. The pay is probably not very good. We know these kind of makeshift lean-tos they were living on, but when this archaeologist excavated these lean-tos, there were porcelain cups in them. There was nice jewelry, things like that. So they're cutting this logwood, and they look out and they go, aha, let's grab that ship. So, like I said, a lot of times piracy is opportunistic. I'll call it an opportunistic profession, unless you had some sort of sponsorship. So I'm trying to ease us away from the Disney version of what piracy was like. And like I say, it's really hard to. I gave this lecture in my Caribbean archaeology class, and I said, what if we weren't the East Carolina University pirates? What if we were the East Carolina University terrorists? What about that for our football? And full disclosure here, I wanted to put this story in the latest book that I've got coming out. And the editor said no. So this may be a triggering event for some of you. So I'm giving you a fair warning. And I had to soften I couldn't use the illustration I'm using next. So I'm glad you're sitting down on this. So here I'm giving this lecture to my class, and I said, maybe what if we were the ECU terrorists? What would our mascot be? And I had a football player in the classroom, and he's back there taking notes, which was unusual. And I said, I've reached tie. This is good. And he comes up to me after class and goes, Dr. Ewen, I've got our new mascot. I'm going, uh-oh. And that's what he was doing. He was drawing the new mascot, and this is it. That is, you know, so I had this little vignette in there. It's a bomb running with a football. And the editor said, no, this isn't going in there. And I said, well, I don't understand why not. And they said, well, this is a little jarring. And I said, well, that's the point. When you get the book, and I know you will as soon as it comes out, you'll see how I toned it down some. So let's go talk about our favorite pirate in North Carolina, Blackbeard the pirate. Now, the archaeology I'm doing now is in a state park called Brunswicktown. Brunswicktown was a colonial port in North Carolina. It is the most important colonial port that you've never heard of. Has anyone ever been to Brunswicktown? Yeah, we've got a couple. Okay, it's not on the way to anywhere, but it's a port on the Cape Fear. And I say this because when I mention this in class, unless somebody's going down to Southport or something, they've never heard of it. It's similar. Blackbeard is probably the most important, most famous pirate that we know almost nothing about. We know about the last 2 years of his life, basically. Let me ask these questions. What was his name? Edward Teach. I hear Edward Teach. Do I hear anything else? Edward Thatch, okay. Edward Drummond, that appears. Edward Beard. Yeah, that's, those have all been suggested. How about if I ask you, where is he from? Pittsburgh would be great. A little landlocked, but okay. Africa, I've heard England. Whereabouts in England? Plymouth, all those are good ones. Bristol is the one that has been put up there. How about Jamaica? How about Bath, North Carolina? Those have all been published. What we think we know about Blackbeard's early life comes from Charles Johnson's A General History of the Robberies and Murders of the Most Notorious Pirates, the one written in 1724. Charles Johnson, and if you go to the Library of Congress and look at one of the versions of this, it gets published, like a lot of those things over a number of years, and they get edited along the way. Anyone know who Charles Johnson was? Captain Charles Johnson? If you look at Library of Congress, they say Daniel Defoe, the Robinson Crusoe guy. But most serious historians don't think so. Do you know, have you heard any? Yeah. Now, Nathaniel Mist is now the person, he's a Jacobite author, publisher. He had pamphlets and things out there. And this was to whip up public sentiment against piracy. So there's politics in behind this. And I agree completely with Max that politics plays a great role in a lot of that, and especially our public perceptions of that. So Blackbeard, according to Charles Johnson, was a Bristol man, born and raised, and he went out, was a privateer for a bit, and but then and he's a privateer sailing in the company of Benjamin Hornigold, and we kind of pick him up in the historical record in 1716 when he parts company. He had been a privateer, he parts company with Benjamin Hornigold, and he goes on to be a pirate. Now, Kevin Duffus, who is an independent scholar, and that's a euphemism for someone not in academia, who he hates, although we seem to hit it off okay. But he wrote The Last Days of Blackbeard the Pirate, and he picks up on the work of another local historian, John Oden, and says it's from the Beard family in Bath, North Carolina. And when he goes and gets pardoned in Bath, he's actually going home, and he's bringing slaves, which is what was sent out to do. And the book, I'm not totally on board with it. In fact, I'm not really on board with it at all, but it's an interesting read. And I got involved in the whole thing because there is a skeleton that is in the archives in Raleigh at the Office of State Archaeology. It was excavated from a site that was owned by the Beard family on the north side of Bath Creek. And Kevin thought that this was Edward Salter, who was Blackbeard's cooper or barrel maker. And Edward Salter had a history in Bath, and then supposedly went off with Blackbeard, and then he's back. And Kevin thought if he could prove that that skeleton was, in fact, Edward Salter, he would have a Blackbeard connection and it would all make sense. And so he comes to me. I really love my job because I get the most interesting questions asked to me. Could you help me identify this skeleton? I think it might be a pirate. How many times do you get asked that? Probably not very often, and I don't either. But I said, okay, why not? And I got up with my colleagues in biology, and one said, yeah, we could do DNA analysis. And Kevin said he had Salter descendants, and the state said, no, that is not happening. And so Kevin eventually has a lawsuit ECU, once the state says no, says, yeah, we're out. And, but Kevin does retrieve the skeleton, takes it to the Smithsonian, where Doug Owsley, a forensic anthropologist, said, I will do the DNA analysis if you can demonstrate that these couple of guys you have are direct descendants of Edward Salter. And they couldn't do the genealogy. And so as far as I know, the DNA was never done. And he is, if you go to St. Thomas Church in Bath, you will see the grave believed to be of Edward Salter, but we can't say for sure. That's all on the tombstone. Little side story, and I got to keep looking because I get off on some of these interesting side stories. So maybe he's from Bath. But then I was on the committee of a history grad student who did research in the archives in Kingston, Jamaica, and found that there was an Edward Teach there, that was the son of a British naval captain, and in fact served in the Navy before turning pirate. And so all of these, of the three, Bayless Brooks's, and he's actually published a book on it that the state has published through the North Carolina Public History Publications, and it's a tough read. His thesis was tough to get through too, but it makes kind of an interesting case. Do we know that he would tie match cords on his hair and set them on fire and put them under his hat? Charles Johnson said he did. That he had braces of pistols and knives and all that. Charles Johnson said he did. Is this hyperbole? Almost certainly. But let's pick it up where we can corroborate a little bit of the story of Blackbeard, and then we'll get into a little bit of the archaeology. So he is sailing in the Lesser Antilles in 1717, and he captures a slave ship, La Concorde, from France. It's on its third slaving voyage. And slave ships actually make pretty good pirate ships. They're roomy and they're fast, and you can refit them as Blackbeard does. And this is interesting, for such a monster, do you know we have no historical record of him killing anyone until his final battle, in which he's finally killed? So, and when he captures the Concorde, he says, oh, I like this ship, it's going to be my flagship. He gives his old ship to the slavers, and they take a lot of the slaves with him. He keeps some, but there's no record really of him selling them. He may have had some of them join his crew, but we're not even sure of that. There are some mentions that he had some African Americans on his crew, but it's all very happenstance. It's very, very difficult to separate out the lore from the real history, and especially if you're in North Carolina, that goes with Blackbeard. So how bad a guy could he be if he goes, yeah, you can have this boat and I'm taking your new one? It's like, I'm robbing your car because I like it better, but here, you can have mine, you know, seems fair. So he does that, but he gets the Concorde and he stuffs it with cannons, 44 cannons. This is as powerful a ship as there is on this side of the Atlantic, just about. And at one point, he has 9 ships and over 300 pirates in his flotilla. He is a force to be reckoned with. And one of the most notorious things he does is he blockades Charleston. And he demands ransom from them. He says, you pay the ransom or we'll do something terrible. And he wasn't letting ships go in and out. A couple tried, and he robbed them. He demanded a chest of medicine. We're not quite sure what that's all about. But he gets that, and he moves on. And to blockade Charleston, I mean, hokey smokes. So that's how, two things. That's how much fear he commanded and how little defense there was over here. Which is why piracy could thrive the way that it did. So he blockades Charleston and he takes off. And he decides he is going to careen his ship up on the coast of North Carolina, but he's going in what is now Beaufort Inlet. It was called Topsail Inlet at the time, and it's down by Beaufort, and he runs aground. And there's some question about this. Is he running the ship aground on purpose, or was this an accident? And another ship in his flotilla, the Adventure, comes to try and pull him off, but it runs aground. So, and we've only got a couple of sentences to talk about this, so it's unclear. Looking at the wreck, and I'll talk about that, it appears that the hull was not in terribly good shape. There were lots and lots of lead patches on it, which is how they patched wooden ships at that time. Also, we think this might be a bit of corporate downsizing on Blackbeard's part. 300, it was just unwieldy, 9 ships. And so these two run aground. He takes Stede Bonnet, another pirate that was sailing with him, probably the worst pirate that ever was. But he takes his ship, maroons Bonnet. Bonnet was later captured and hung. But he takes Bonnet's ship, sails to Bath, where Governor Eden is there, and says, and there is a policy out. One of the ways, since they didn't really have the naval power to do it, England said, look, if you give up being a pirate, put that out to all pirates. It's an amnesty thing. If you give up being a pirate, everything's forgiven. Just don't do it again. And so he went in to take the king's pardon, and he got it from the governor. And so had he gone straight, we may not be talking about this too much. We'll go back to the ship that's running aground in a moment. But while he's in Bath, this is where there's so much folklore that gets in here. He lives up to a reputation as a family man. They call him that in Bath. And marries his 14th wife. We have no evidence of any wives, let alone a 14th wife. Supposedly in a ceremony presided by Governor Eden. And lives out here on Plum Point. And if you go to the Bonner House, if you're visiting Bath, North Carolina, and look out on Bath Creek is over here, and this is Back Creek going this way. If you look out here, you can see where his house was somewhere. Yes? I'm sorry, this is 1718. So like I said, he gets his ship in 1717. He splits off from Hornigold in 1716. 1718, he's getting pardoned in Bath. There is an 18th century house that has been recorded on there, but it's Weyerhaeuser land, and they're not letting anyone on it anymore. I'd like to go out and check it, but I've been unable to get permission. And no one's been back to it, although there are stories that, well, okay, I did get on there once. And everybody and their brother has been digging holes there, and there's just no treasure to be found there. But so he gets pardoned. Supposedly takes a while. If he's in Bath for more than 2 weeks, I can't find it in the historical record. So I'm not sure where he has time to get married and build a house and do all this stuff. And one of the things he does is he goes out sailing out the inlet there, and he finds a French ship that's abandoned, just sailing out there, just floating around full of cargo. And he brings it back and said, oh my goodness, the ship, I found it. And the governor says, wow, huh, well, I guess it's yours, and they sell all the stuff. And so of course he didn't just find an abandoned ship, he's gone back to being a pirate. But this is kind of why North Carolina likes pirates. We have a crappy coast for commerce. I mean, the Outer Banks that we love today is terrible for getting ships in and out. And that's why Norfolk and Charleston, are doing such, and that's actually why it's Virginia that finally gets sick of Blackbeard. We liked him. He was bringing us good stuff at cheap prices. So what's not to like? So he's clearly gone back to his pirating ways. Governor Spotswood, who is not doing well politically, decides to make some political capital by commissioning a Royal Naval vessel, which is a small one, a fifth-rater, come down and get Blackbeard. And this is one of these battles in slow motion, and I won't go into the whole thing, but Blackbeard, they'd apparently been up late the night before, and no one's paying much attention. Lieutenant Maynard, with a couple of ships, small ships, come up. The pirates see them. They start to get underway, but they run aground. The Royal Naval vessels start to move in. They run aground. And so they're all trying to get off, pull themselves off, and they're firing cannons at each other. Finally, Maynard is able to pull himself and grapple on with the Queen Anne's Revenge, and a pitched battle takes place. And what makes a royal vessel probably a more than a match for even a superior pirate vessel is that they're trained to fight. I mean, they practice this sort of. The pirates were less disciplined. But anyways, even though the English take some casualties, Blackbeard, according to all the accounts, gets shot a couple times, stabbed a few more, finally falls down. They cut his head off and throw his body over the side, and it swims around the boat 5 or 7 times, depending on who you believe. I don't believe any of them, but and then his head is affixed to the bowsprit of the ship. They take some of his captives, pirates, to Bath, and then they sail on to Norfolk. They go to Williamsburg, where they're tried, and almost all of them are hung, the survivors, except for Edward Salter and one other who supposedly, according to Kevin Duffus, comes back to Bath. So that's the end of Blackbeard, almost. Charles Wedby, who writes lore about North Carolina, writes a story about a secret society that to be a member, you have to drink rum out of the silver-lined skull of Blackbeard, which they have. Now, I don't want to hear about it now, but if any of you are members, see me later. I want in. So I keep asking, and so far I'm not a member yet, and I couldn't tell you if I was. But so that's the end of Blackbeard, and so it's unlikely we're going to find much more about him in historical record. We've got newspapers accounts of some of his depredations. We can sort of trace his meanderings up the east coast of North America and in the Caribbean, and we know that he finished up in North Carolina. So we can talk about his ship, because that, and even that's controversial. So the ship was found pretty much by accident. There was a treasure hunting company called Intersal, and they were looking for a Spanish treasure ship, El Salvador, that is supposed to be off Beaufort Inlet somewhere, as near as their historical research has been. And they got a permit from the state, and they're looking, and they find this wreck, and they've done enough research, so they thought that, well, this is the Queen Anne's Revenge. So they report it, and the state says, oh, okay. And it was actually on their permit that they thought that might be in the area. So they find it, but they realize that there is nothing on the ship. The ship runs aground. It doesn't go sinking in a storm or anything. It runs aground. Presumably, the pirates could get anything of value off of it. They had plenty of time. And so the only things left were heavy things like cannons and anchors and stuff that they couldn't salvage. So the Intersal says, okay, there's a whole lawsuit thing going on, and I don't have time to talk about that. I'll talk about that in questions if you want. But they essentially turn it over to the state, and the state begins doing archaeology, underwater archaeology, recording, bringing up what they can. I got to dive on the ship. That's me back when my hair was, I frost it now, but when a few years ago on that. And I got to tell you, this is the worst. Let me jump ahead. I'm not going to jump ahead. I'll have to go back. If you want to know where the wreck is, here's Fort Macon If you go to Fort Macon and stand on the beach and look out to sea, if you knew exactly where to look, you would find it here. If you want to take a boat and look around, the Coast Guard actually has a tower here, and if a boat lingers nearby, they come out and tell you to move along. Presumably, it ran into shoals as it was going in through Beaufort Inlet. It was found, Intersal found it in 1996, and it's right now in about 20 feet of water. So think about that. How does a ship, even a ship as big as the Queen Anne's Revenge, and it's almost, you could put it into Dowdy-Ficklin Stadium. It's about the size of a football field, maybe a little less. And how does it run aground in 20 feet of water? One of the controversies that, and I want you to think about that. So, and the controversy is, so the state was very careful about saying what they thought about the Queen Anne's Revenge, and they kept saying it's a ship we believe to be the Queen Anne's Revenge. But they're calling it the Beaufort Inlet wreck in all the official correspondence. And, but of course, the News and Observer and everybody else was like, Blackbeard ship found, this is great. And then a couple of my colleagues in the Maritime Studies program at East Carolina say, not so fast. There's some problems with this here. To which the reporters start calling us, and they called me and they go, well, how could you say this? And I said, well, we never really did, but we believe it to be the Queen Anne's Revenge. So I'm going to ask you, how would we know if it's the Queen Anne's Revenge? What would we need to find to be able to identify it as the pirate ship? Not a rhetorical question, and don't be like my freshman and not make eye contact, so what do we need to find? And I can't be like Max, I don't know your all names, so. It does have a bell. And you would say, ooh, if it says Concord on it, that would be good. Or even if they had had time to whip up a Queen Anne's Revenge bell, which they did not. No, it just had a date on it, but the date was good. It's 1709, so it supposedly sinks in 1718. So, but this is the big question. How can we tell? Let's say you're the underwater archaeologist and I've got a state grant of $100,000. What are you going to do? France.
So would people tell the wood,
Aha.
identify the wood, they be able to?
So ship construction, that's pretty good. The wood, maybe the way it's put together. I got to tell you, I'm not a nautical archaeologist. I've done some, but I'm mostly a land guy. But the nautical guys, they know all about ship constructions. They teach whole classes in it. I tried to sit through one of them, but there's different ways that they do things. And remember, it was a slave ship before it was a pirate ship. And it was only a pirate ship for about a year. Let's see, some of the things you should be thinking about. I keep saying this to reporters, why didn't you ask these questions? It's got to be in the right place. We have newspaper accounts that said it went in at the mouth of the inlet of Old Topsail Inlet. So it's in the right place. So we're okay with it. No, they knew it. Yeah, they knew. Yeah, let's go back and look at that. So and this channel has moved a lot. But it's in approximately the right place according to the newspaper accounts. Enough, the newspaper account was vague enough so that it fits the general idea here. It sinks in 1718, so most of the artifact, they can't date after 1718. The terminus post quem has to be 1718. If you have something from 1730 or later, or 1719 or later, it can't be the Queen Anne's Revenge. And you're going to have mostly early 18th century artifacts in there to distinguish it from other wrecks. Also, artifacts unique to the voyage. Now, when I say that for pirates, you think, oh, there's a barrel full of hooks, or, you know, parrot skeletons or something like that. Honestly, without a scorecard, it's hard to tell the difference between a pirate ship and a merchant vessel or a naval vessel. And pirate ships, especially from merchant vessels, because pirates were stealing merchant vessels. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Indeed it had, because that would have been great too. A bell with Concord on it, or the name back here somewhere. The only part of this ship that survives is that which has been covered. When it comes over on its side, the ballast pile spreads out on the side and buries some of the wood, and then sand comes in. It's only the buried stuff. The ship worms, the teredo worms, eat the rest of this. So virtually all the wood except for that that's been buried is gone. But that's a good idea.
What about remnants of shackles, slave ships?
An excellent point. Well, let's get to that point too, and then head back to this other one. Well, heck, I thought I had that. But yes, something that says, you know, that it had slavery in it, shackles, something like that. We also know that this was a large, heavily armed. In fact, going back and doing, studying the records such as they are on shipping in and out of Beaufort, this was the largest, most heavily vessel by far in the throughout the 18th century. So we'd want to find a lot of cannons. And we might want to compare this to other known pirate ships, and there really aren't that many. There is a contemporary one up in Cape Cod, the Whydah, which Black Sam Bellamy's ship that went down, and we have looked at. In fact, one of my students did her thesis comparing the assemblage from the Whydah with the Queen Anne's Revenge to a contemporary naval vessel and a contemporary merchant vessel. So we'll talk a little on that. But the point is, it's not easy. If you were just to come across this in the middle of nowhere and you'd say, well, what kind of ship was it? You'd be hard pressed. If you didn't have the historical record at all, you'd be hard pressed to tell. There's nothing that just screams pirate at you. So let's see what they got. There you go. First of all, it's a challenging excavation. When I dove on it, I mean, I couldn't see you guys. It would all just be, it's just murky and it's turbid. And when they took me down, one of my doctoral students was the project director, and he worked for the state at the same time. And he says, we're going to go down and we're going to go see the anchor. And we did. I ran into it, bonk, and I went, okay. And then we were going to go see a cannon. I ran into that. And then I ran into the guy that was making the underwater map. It was just, and you're whooshing back and forth in the current. So the underwater people, I give them kudos for that. They're doing an excellent job. And then getting the larger things out. This anchor took all day to get it out, bobbing around. Ugh. Good thing I don't get seasick. I was maybe a little bit, but not as bad as some of the other people on the boat. But breaking it loose from the sea floor, getting it up, and then trying not to break it when you're getting it out of the water, like I say, it's a lot of work. And then the work's only started, because then you've got to conserve these things. So here's the map. There's an anchor here, and then these are all cannons. So one record said he had 44 cannon. I think we've identified 36. How many have we pulled up? I think I wrote that down. 23, I think, have been brought up, but it takes forever to conserve those, especially the larger ones. So a large, let's say a 9-pounder. They didn't have many. They had 6-pounders. Now, 6-pounder is referring to the weight of the cannonball that it fires. So, so a 6-pounder weighs about a ton. Bring it up. Thing you got to do is you got to get the water, you got to get the salt out of it, because if it dries out and the salt, which is imbued, it crystallizes, it just pops it apart and it turns into a pile of rust. So you got to soak it, get some more salt out, change the water, soak it, get the water out, soak it, and then put it into electrolysis, electrolytic reduction, to get more of the rust off and consolidate the good metal. And then you've got to dry it, and then you've got to coat it. Okay, from sea floor to museum door, how long? A year? A couple of years? Probably 7 years. And everything that comes up gets conserved on the West Research Campus at East Carolina, and then it goes down to the Beaufort Museum, and then they decide who gets, which other museums get it. So little by little. All these are the excavation units. So they've done about half of the ship. They pulled up some of the timbers here, and they have pulled up, I think, this anchor, because the central pile here, that's supposed to come up at some point, but it hasn't yet. They've done, and we know from using magnetometry where these other cannons are. So we know that it's heavily armed. More, I don't think we quite have 44 cannons, but we've got over 30. So, and like I said, nothing else kind of comes close to that. Let's look at some of the artifacts. Shackles, I think we're up to about a half dozen shackles now. And interesting stuff that, this is the rope, because it's been in contact with the metal, is actually preserved. So that's on there. And there would have been an iron bar that goes across there that would lock at the end. And so you put the legs or arms in there, and then you run the bar over, and they can't do that. But, okay, slave ship, sounds good. Every ship has a brig, and they all have shackles. So that's not as compelling as I once thought it might be. A lot of arms and armor, and thousands of musket balls and lead shot and cannonballs. These are grenades. Actually, that's the same grenade from 2 different perspectives. So they were sailing probably more than a merchant ship would, and it was such a variety of different kinds of arms that it doesn't seem like a naval vessel that would have been all fitted out at once. Charleston, they took that medicine chest as ransom. This is a urethral syringe used for treating syphilis. You would have filled this with mercury, and there was traces of mercury in it. Apply it to the affected part, and you didn't get better. So, yeah, and in fact, we also have a Kleister syringe for the other end. And but once again, every ship had a doctor, or wanted to have a doctor. So it's tempting to say, if only there was a maker's mark from Charleston, that would kind of knock it down, but we didn't get that lucky. Lots and lots of liquor bottles. Are these rum bottles? Maybe. Actually, sherry seemed to be more popular on ships than rum. But it could have been either one, but all ships had that because fresh water was the problem. That's why they had grog, which was rum mixed with water, because the water was terrible. Knocked the mold off. You mix some rum in it, it's better. Some other really interesting stories. This just shows the wonderful work they do at the conservation lab. They had this little round piece here from a concretion. When metal objects get deposited on the seafloor, this lime stuff kind of forms around it. And they look like little chunks of concrete, but they're full of artifacts. This was taken out. If you look at the side, it looks almost like a miniature version of the Death Star on Star Wars. And we're going, I wonder what that is. And then this tube was found elsewhere, this brass tube. And one of the conservators there, even though they're from 2 different concretions on close to each other on the ship, but not necessarily next to each other, put them together. It's a bosun's whistle. So, and we even know who the bosun was on Blackbeard ship. What do you think this is? This is my favorite game as an archaeologist. Guess what this artifact is? No. No, no, not a good. It's, well, there, I was going to say how big it was, but there it is. It's 2 centimeters. It's pretty small. It's a weight, and it's for measuring gold dust. And it's an Akan. This fowl here is an Akan chicken from Africa. And gold dust, there has been some gold dust recovered from the bilge of the Queen Anne's Revenge. And this would have been used for weighing out gold dust. And then, this is the coolest, and I'll go quickly on this story. In the wadding at the end of a cannon, where the cannonball comes in and you put wadding in to hold it in place before you blow up the black powder at the other end, someone had taken a book and ripped out pages and stuffed the paper in his wadding. And so this, a little bit of it survived. So this is, I don't know, a little bigger than your thumbnail, this little part. They dried it out carefully. They were able to tell some of the words. And you can see it's hard to do. But then they started looking at books from 1718 earlier. They found the book. It was a book about Woodes Rogers, who was the governor of the Bahamas that cleaned out the pirates. And it's tempting to say, and we know that in Stede Bonnet's ship, he had a library, and Blackbeard just took whatever he wanted from Stede Bonnet all the time. That having this book on the hated Woodes Rogers, you rip the pages out and jam it. It's a good story. It's a just so story. Is it true? I want it desperately to be, but to be able to match up these words here, and that's a page from the actual book. It's great. It shows just a level of research that these folks do. The controversies, running aground in 20 feet of water. Well, we know we got some marine geologists out there. We know that the channel goes back and forth. Hurricanes go through. The ship probably ran aground in 6 to 8 feet of water. And then it's been scoured out by the channel moving and hurricanes. Right now, it's resting on solid substrate, and it's not going to go any deeper. And it's sooner or later, things are just going to get blown around from it. This cannon was tremendously controversial, and this shows it coming out of the water. When they cleaned it up, they could read, scratched in the barrel, 1, 7, 3. Is that a 0? Oh no, it can't be. So, 1730 can't be the Queen Anne's Revenge, if that is a date. And so there's a couple of ideas about it. First of all, if it is a date that's been scratched in, it's the only one that we've ever seen like that. Not to say it couldn't happen, but it's the only one. It might be a lot number. You know, pirates got their cannons where they could, even if they had to buy them. And cannons also were sold by weight. And if you do, and I can't even explain it to you because I don't understand it myself, but there's a type of weight measure called hundredweights. And if you look at it, it's hard to do since you've lost some of the poundage. But this is roughly the weight of the cannon. And if you're buying the cannons by the pound, which is how most of them are sold, that would seem, using Occam's razor, to make more sense than scratching a date on it. But you know, they don't. If you go visit, and you can, they have an open house a couple times a year, and you can't see this. I wonder where they put this one, what museum it's in. But you can go to the lab and see the ones that they're working on now, and the anchor that they brought up. So there's some controversies, but Mark Walder-Ramsing, my student that worked on this, and I finally, after we did all the research, the rebuttal of something, there's just so much information that says there is no smoking blunderbuss that said this is his ship, you know. But you know, the majority of proof, beyond reasonable doubt, there's no other vessel of that size that ran into the inlet that has been found or was recorded ever going in and out of the inlet. All the, virtually all of the artifacts are, if you discount that, are before 1718. Now there's the occasional golf ball and stuff that I guess comes off of somebody's other ship. In fact, there was some coal that was found that actually has been sourced to a foundry during the Civil War, because Fort Macon was besieged for a while. So we do get some Civil War stuff that is dropped on it, but not much. But all the artifacts date before 1718. We can explain why it's in 20 feet of water, which still isn't that deep. And I would say the story that the News and Observer ran saying, what is the controversy here, really prompted the state to redouble their efforts and collect a lot more data than they would have been. Are they going to get the other half of it out? I don't know. Underwater archaeology is expensive. And so what we've done, though, is there's a partnership now between East Carolina University and the North Carolina Division of Natural and Cultural Resources that they've got, it's their lab with their personnel on our campus that we get to send our students to. And I'm the liaison with the lab with the state. And I got to tell you, the best part of my day is when I can go out there and, put my hand on a cannon that maybe Blackbeard put his hand on. The worst day of my time of my life is getting parking passes and stuff like that for the state people from the university. So anyways, it's a great partnership. We've got at least almost a dozen theses out of this, a lot of research collaborations. And I urge you all, when you get the opportunity, to come and see us and come see what we found. Thank you.
Why don't we, we'll take some questions, maybe have 10 minutes or so of questions, then we'll take questions for all scholars.
Sort of proving a negative. Wouldn't there be a record of any other ships of that size that would have sunk?
That's what we think. We have not found any records of a similar sized or armed vessel. Not to say that we don't come across it at some point, but right now, the QAR is the largest vessel, is the only vessel of that size that went in and out of.
Ship of that size had gone down?
One would think. And that's the point we made in our article. We would hope that would be the case, but, yeah.
I have a question here, Joe.
When you travel down east, you go through Otway.
Yes.
And you see the big pirate. So Captain Otway Burns,
Mm-hmm.
is that a big deal in your private scholarship?
Not in mine so much, but the historians at ECU, they had a big exhibit on him in the library. There was an article written by another student, not of mine, in history, that really talked about, like I said, these part-time pirates. And like I said, they're just poor, and they'd get caught stealing something, and then they'd be hanged. And it just, like I said, it really puts the whole romanticism of piracy to rest, I think.
In the golden age of piracy, you've talked about North Carolina and the Caribbean, but the Spanish also had important trade routes from the Philippines to California, Acapulco. Is there evidence also in stories of privateering and piracy on the West Coast?
When I was asked to do the first book, they said, the editor of University Press of Florida says, I want you to do a book on the archaeology of piracy. And I went, okay. Because I've been trained, if someone asks you to publish, always say yes, you can figure it out. And so I'm walking out with my colleague, Russ Skoranek, and I said, okay, the Florida Press wants me to do this, because I'd done a book on DeSoto for them. And I said, I don't know. I mean, there's the Queen Anne's Revenge, and he thought of some, and by the time we got back to our room, we'd thought of a half a dozen. And then we started to beat the bushes, because what makes these books different, it's about the archaeology of piracy, not necessarily just the history of piracy. And when it went out for review, one of the criticisms we got was, you're not talking about the pirate archaeology in the Pacific. and I figured out who the reviewer was. I know you're not supposed to, but I sent him an email. I said, hey, Jim, we're doing this book, and I don't know if you've heard about it, but a reviewer wants us to know about, piracy in the Pacific. And I said, I don't know of any shipwrecks in the Pacific associated with piracy. Do you? And he came back and goes, well, now that you say it, Charlie, I really don't. And then the next day I heard from the press, you're good to go. So no, in the Pacific, apart from, well, I'd still put that more in the Indian Ocean, around Madagascar, there's, and Mauritius, there's the Speaker, which was a wreck, and then Madagascar itself was a pirate lair, if you will. I'm sure they were preying on those galleons, but we don't have any archaeology of that per se. Yeah.
We have a question. We have a question here, Sam. Then I'm gonna come to you, Bruce.
Okay.
I'm in charge of the questions.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you. When I signed up for this, I did it because I was going to go to Madagascar and maybe some of the islands in the Indian Ocean.
San Marie.
Yeah.
That's where you're
So can you kind of just extrapolate why you think modern pirates go after oil ships that belong to somebody rather than like the Love Boat that has got 1,000 people on it?
That's a good point. First of all, I think people would be more outraged if they took a cruise ship. And cruise ships don't go by Somalia for the most part. No, what they're doing there is they're not robbing them. They're holding them hostage, and they hold them for ransom. And honestly, it's cheaper for these countries to pay the ransom than to arm the boats or to have a ship sail with them. And honestly, also the U.S. Navy, were we going to get involved? That is just something I don't think we wanted to get, the whole Captain Phillips thing. Well, we do, but even they could see that this is going to be a morass that would be hard to extract ourselves from. And I think the Captain Phillips thing was an exception to the rule. But yeah, no, they're more about taking ransom, and the ships take their chances when they go through.
Yeah, you were looking for a Pacific Coast pirate, and of course, there's One-Eyed Willie.
Yeah, from the Goonies.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. And in our images of piracy, we have an homage to him in that. So,
Questions for Dr. Ewen? Okay, we have time for about a 20-minute panel or so.
Okay.
You want to panel up? Let's panel
good.
up. So I guess what I would do is I would start by just saying, why don't we pull up 2 chairs here, and we'll just do it this way.
all right.
There's so many through lines that I heard in this, and it actually ends on that interesting point about ransoming and slavery, and it seems to me it was something that I thought was really interesting was this this type of world of commerce in which human trafficking is very much part of it. It's there was a through line there with this as well. I mean, North Carolina being a
Oh, and yeah, when I mentioned, I didn't get back to that. According to Kevin Duffus, North Carolina, or Bath area especially, needed labor, and his hypothesis is that Edward Beard went out and he was supposed to get some slaves, which is why he took the Concorde, which is all of this stuff. You have to make a lot of leaps of faith, and I'm not willing to make as many as Kevin wants us to. But when he comes home to Bath, he's bringing slaves with him. But once again, we don't have, I mean, could he have taken a bunch of slaves? Yeah, I guess, but we don't have that historical confirmation of that. We just have well, it seems to me that's what I would have done if I were Blackbeard. And a lot of this kind of revolves down into that's what I would have done if I were Blackbeard. And I don't think you can really do good scholarship that way.
Open up the floor for questions. You have a question? Yeah, Ben. Do you have any questions from the online audience at all? Well, I'm going to remind folks on our online audience they can use the Q&A button at the bottom of their screen. Oh, turn my mic on. Oh, there we go. And remind the speaker to turn their mics on. Okay, so any questions about anything we've talked about today?
Why do you think that piracy has become so romanticized? What's the allure of this?
I think it's the way, and then I'll let Max say I'll just blurt in right now. You know, I really think it's, we've romanticized it. It's, like I said, it goes back to Treasure Island, and everybody thinks, wow, this is really neat. This is burying treasure, and it's kind of scary. And for kids especially, it's scary, but not so scary that they're staying up all night type of thing. So, and then when Disney gets involved in Hollywood, they further soften the idea. I put up Captain Blood because he's a pirate with a heart of gold. Yeah, he's got rough and tough guy, but he's doing it for it's the Spaniards that are really the bad folks in his things. Also, you know, the Disney characters are all real sympathetic. And when they have Treasure Planet and Muppet Treasure Island, you know, it all gets kind of, you know, fun and games on that, which is why I wanted to put that really jarring thing in the book so that we could, at least for a moment, suspend our admiration of the pirates.
It's like I say, we were talking about we're going to have a fun seminar, but I always say, yeah, a fun seminar about enslaving murderous war criminals, you know? But I think they're romanticized for another reason. There's always a little bit of the Robin Hood kind of idea, like, and what I mean by that, not necessarily that they're giving their booty to the poor, but screwing over the system, the sense of freedom that you get, you know, when you think about economic systems that, you know, and especially in this era where, you know, this is not a pull yourself up by your bootstraps, you can be anything you want type of society. It's very rigid, very hierarchical, and that sense of freedom that I think is romanticized, you know, that these are people that are able, they're not stuck tilling this field. They're not stuck doing all the things they have to do. They can go out and make it on their own. And I just think that sense of adventure and a little bit of freedom will always be appealing to people.
And going back to Blackbeard, Stede Bonnet, who is from the Southport, Cape Fear area, like I said, he was a terrible pirate. Well, he decided, he was a planter, and he decided he wanted to be a pirate. And this was in the early 18th century. He buys a pirate ship. Who does that? And he hires a crew, and he goes out, and he eventually he hooks up with Blackbeard, who says, yeah, you're pretty well fitted out. Yeah, you can be with me, but I need all your stuff, and get off that ship. And he just was terrible. And he kept coming back, but apparently he had an unhappy marriage, and he was tired of being a planter, and so he thought being a pirate would be better. And he gets hung, you know, so for his trouble.
Yes, mine is not so much a question as it's just a couple of points I want to make about the relationship between piracy and privateering. And I really appreciate that both of you have really kind of tied so much of this together, because I've always understood that, you know, so many pirates got their start as privateers, and I think that's very significant. And just 2 points to make. Number one, I don't know, to illustrate that, I don't know if you've ever seen the old 1950s era movie, The Buccaneer, with Yul Brynner as Jean Lafitte, right?
Yeah.
And you may remember there's a line in there where
knows.
somebody's talking about being a pirate, and he says, pirate, and says, I'm a privateer, you know, kind
Is
of
that
thing.
Jean Lafitte?
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
yes,
yeah.
that's right.
Yul Brynner plays Jean Lafitte, and Andrew Jackson's played by Charlton Heston, if I
Right,
remember.
yeah.
Yeah.
Classic.
And second, and I just think that kind of, you know, that differentiation or maybe tying together of privateering and piracy. And secondly, I think I always like to point it to my students when I'm teaching about the U.S. Constitution. Letters of marque and reprisal are mentioned right there in the U.S. Constitution. That's where you get people like Otway Burns, you know, and I just think that the juxtaposition of those two professions, piracy and privateering, very, very blurred line I can see.
I also want to add about Jean Lafitte. He's just a dealer in stolen goods. You know, he was more of a what we call a fence, because he didn't even go out and rob his own stuff. He and his brother had a blacksmith shop, and they dealt with things that pirates did steal. So.
I'm sorry,
Thalassocracy.
thalassocracy. I mean, isn't that basically, or at least how Jean Lafitte is portrayed as being, running his own little private country? It's a thalassocracy.
So interesting. One other element of privateering and piracy that I think is interesting, and it's a word, mercenary. You know, like that there is also this element, and especially in the Renaissance period that I was talking about, the condottieri, the era of the landsknechts, which were the, you know, lance for hire. That also, I think that we don't really have formalized privateering in the 16th century. I mean, you do in France and in the Northern European countries, but not so much in the Italian and in the Mediterranean. But this idea that it's perfectly normal to have 10 ships and sell your services to Genoa and sell your services to so-and-so. And so, again, that's a privateering, but also business, like contractors, if you will, right?
You know, Peter Leeson, a historian, wrote a book called The Invisible Hook that looks at the business of piracy. I'm not sure I buy the whole thing, but it's really interesting. It looks at piracy from an economic perspective.
When we were saying at the end of my lecture, I was saying, or somewhere in my lecture, I was talking about, you know, maritime insurance, jurisprudence, having these, you know, getting these things where, you know, piracy helped people understand how to handle the risks of doing long distance sea voyages. You know, you're probably more likely to go down the Atlantic from a storm than you are to be captured by a pirate, but all of it is of a piece. Not so much in the Mediterranean. I mean, like, you know, it's a smaller, more contained ship. So that maritime insurance was really developed through interaction with piracy.
Tell us about your current dig.
Oh, okay. I'm digging at Brunswick Town, which is a colonial port, 1725 to about 1775, and I'm digging on a tavern. I got half of it dug before COVID, and now I'm back there. And who knows? I've felt my phone going off today, so I told my grad student I wasn't going to bother him until I get back, so I didn't want to check up. But it is really Brunswick Town. If you go down to Southport, stop in. It's a state historic site. It's a little gem. It's a 50-year time capsule there. And one short story, because I don't want to take away from the pirate set, but we found a cufflink button, and it had engraved on it Wilkes and Liberty 45. And I said, well, that's probably something. And with a little bit of research, John Wilkes was a member of Parliament who didn't like George III, and wrote a series of pamphlets and called the North Britain. Pamphlet number 45, he criticizes the king directly, goes to jail, is acquitted because he's a member of Parliament and is allowed to do that, and he becomes this folk hero. Wilkes and Liberty 45. And there we are in a bar in Brunswick Town that we know had already protested the Stamp Act. And there's some guy talking smack about the government with this seditious cufflink on there.
That's great.
That's why I do archaeology. you know,
Wilkes,
so.
Wilkes-Barre were named after Wilkes.
Women as pirates. I recall there's in the literature. There's one, I can't remember her name.
There's two. There's Anne Bonny and Mary Read, and there I think are some Asian women, and they dressed as men initially to get in there. Anne Bonny was, she was acquitted because she got pregnant by Jack Calico Jack Rackham. And the greatest line, she has the greatest line of all of piracy. So he's hung, she's let go because she's pregnant, but they're captured, and she turns to him and said, "If you'd fought like a man, you wouldn't be hung like a dog."
Yeah,
That's great.
So I had said when about women, someone had asked, one of my coworkers asked me, "Are you finding anything with women and in the Mediterranean?" And I just did not find anything. In fact, Mia read the horrible toxic masculinity about like they're Christian or just like women. So I think, you know, I just don't see any evidence or that I found. If they were very well hidden in the Mediterranean if there were women as captains.
What is the status of archaeological digs in the Mediterranean involving pirates?
You know, there is a Greek wreck called the Kyrenia wreck that Texas A&M did, and it has, some javelins or some sort of speared weapons into it, and it was published as a victim of piracy. You know, is it piracy?
Do you know the era?
Oh gosh, it's the Hellenic period. I don't know. It's something BC, and I'd have to think more. But as far as, you know, like the Barbary pirates, I don't know of any archaeology along the north
I
coast
really
of
don't.
Africa.
In my month of preparation, I didn't get to archaeology. I was leaving it at.
It would have jumped up on you, I'm sure. But so no, I haven't. Other than, you know, Texas A&M has done a lot of work in the Mediterranean, but that Kyrenia wreck is the only one that I know of that's associated with piracy.
The
Or it'd
coolest
be in one of my books. So
the coolest underwater naval wreck in the Mediterranean that I know of is Napoleon's sunken fleet outside of Alexandria, which sunk in after Horatio Nelson sank many of the ships, and they've been pulling some really cool stuff out of the harbor of Alexandria, but they weren't pirates, so.
Someone mentioned about the miserable life of a pirate. So what was the life of the people on these ships? What was their daily life like?
it would vary, I think. If you were with a prosperous pirate like Henry Morgan or Sir Francis Drake, if you're not counting him as a privateer, I would say it wasn't too bad, as long as, I mean, if the money was coming in. I do want to kind of launch off this, is that a lot of has been said about the democracy of pirates. In fact, I read a thesis where this person says the pirate code was the basis for the American Constitution. I'm going, you know what? How did this even get through this committee? And but they all this thing about the pirate code has been brought up. I think it makes nice clickbait to read about. And I don't know what you've come across on that, but you know, as far as miserable life, I think your part-time pirate, which was probably 90% of them, I mean, they were robbing because they weren't having good lives to begin with, and so and then, you know, to be on the run always, because if you're convicted, you're dead. I don't think it was a good life to be a sailor in the 18th century. And being a pirate was probably even worse.
So just two comments on that. One is to also think about the nature of the ship, where the captain is God, you know, and so the talk about democracy. I mean, most ships, just the captain has complete control, and certainly in everything I read about the Barbary pirates, that was also the case. One thing that I think is different with the Barbary pirates is they probably spent as much time on land as they did in the sea, because there were lots of these small islands, and so they would go put themselves on these small islands in the Tyrrhenian Sea out, you know, off, and sort of like this opportunity, wait till the ships come by, jump in the ship. So, you know, it's not like the Atlantic or like the Caribbean perhaps, where they're on board ships for months at a time. These cruises would go out, they would land in places, they'd come back in, you know, average tour was 2 weeks to 6 weeks tops, and a lot of that time you'd be on shore anyway. So,
but it was an uncertain livelihood, and you had to be kind of desperate to turn to it.
So there's one symbol that I've always associated with pirates that's not been mentioned at all. The skull and crossbones flag. Is that also a myth?
No, they would, and in fact, part of the reason, and some of, now the flags that are associated with different pirates, that's, you could get a poster that says, here are all the pirate flags and here are they're associated with. Maybe, maybe not. I'm not sure of the scholarship on that, but they really did. And a lot of times there were red flags that they would put up. And the whole point of that is you wanted to scare the hell out of whoever you were going to rob, so they would just give up. I mean, it didn't do you any good to sink their ship or blow up a lot of the cargo. So you wanted to sail up with your ship bristling with cannon, run up the skull and crossbones or the equivalent, and have them go, take what you want, Mr. Blackbeard. You know, I'm down with that.
One thing you guys didn't touch on were river pirates. I know that in the Rhine, the original robber barons were folks who would come out and rob trade, and then of course the Pittsburgh pirates are named after pirates that came out in the
Colonel
river.
Plug along the Mississippi River. Yeah, there are, and if it's happening on water, it's piracy.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I mean, any number of the Danube going up into the Black Sea and going up the Danube, going, in the mouth of the Nile. Any of the major rivers would always, any opening, sure, if you can get a boat up it, the pirate's probably going to go up there. I know that if you looked at the map of Iceland, they went into a fjord and inlet, and went pretty far in to get, so, if you can get the boats there, and especially a lot of these pirate ships are meant to go into shallower water. So yeah, I think next time we'll have river pirates. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This question is for Max. Charles, you made mention of running up the red flag. I'm wondering, Max, what is the significance of the red sock?
Well, look, here's the thing. First of all, they are matching socks. I just want to let you know that one is black and one is red. And the significance is they were the only socks I found that were clean this morning. And they have really wonderful arch support. And all pirates need a good arch support. So when they were walking on the decks and whatnot. So yes, that's the significance. I hope you're scared by my red sock. It's on the left foot. So.
Well, then obviously a question is, are you heading to Greenville after this thing, since you're joining the pirates?
Yeah.
But one of the things, I did a little bit of research before this also, and it's probably Wikipedia. I can't remember where my source is, but it said piracy goes way back in the Mediterranean.
Yes.
I think they said the 14th century BC is the first recorded incidents. And as you think, the Mediterranean is well named, because it's in the middle of all of these places that have all these different resources. Yeah. And so you're starting to be involved in trade. And so I'm just wondering, my son took a course at University of Miami in maritime law. And they said if law is based in precedent, there are laws relating to maritime issues such as ship going down or piracy that goes back to the Phoenicians.
Sure.
That wouldn't surprise me.
That wouldn't surprise me at all.
And it's just, yeah. It's
the Minoans, the Mycenaeans, all those guys.
Yeah, and you had to have
thalassocracies. Did I
yes,
say that?
yeah, that's a great word, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm going to use it a lot.
So, this thing, I remember learning in ancient Egypt and learning about the sea peoples. Like, there's something like, this is something you had to fight the sea peoples. And I kept asking.
I mean, you go up to Georgia.
And I said,
all of that stuff, Greek myths and stories of getting the gold from the golden fleece.
Yeah, I said, who are these sea peoples?
Connected into this.
Yeah, who are these sea
they were
peoples?
pirates,
They're pirates. They're
yeah.
pirates. And the Cilician pirates that Pompey took on. I mean, they were these informal thalassocracies, essentially, where you just, most piracy, as both Charlie and I have been talking about, is contingent. It's just the ship out there. It's that we had a bad catch. But every once in a while, as Thucydides says, hey, we should just keep doing this, and then you find some friends, and the next thing you know, you control all of the Eastern Mediterranean.
Well, and also what I liked, and you're talking about the Roman suppressing it, it just goes along with, that's how it ends up in the Caribbean. Is you've got finally a powerful government decides to put the hammer down, and England says no more pirates, and that's what the Romans did. No more pirates. So
you didn't mention them, but I presume that you would include the Vikings as also being
as a form
pirates.
of pirate in a way. And in fact, it came to me very much like almost identical type of things, taking people for like enslaving people and putting them to work, maybe adopting them. Raiding from the shore, we think about piracy always on the sea. Most of the pirate actions in the Mediterranean, I mean, not most, but there's a whole variety and genre, which is just raiding coastal towns, and that's Viking behavior. And the thing about Vikings, of course, is that's actually a verb, right? To go a Viking means to go out and marauding. It wasn't what they called themselves, anybody. It was like a thing that you were doing. Look at these people, they're going out a Viking. If you want to read a great book, read The Longships by Bengtson.
I saw the movie with Richard Widmark.
Yeah, but nothing like the book. Oh, nothing like the book. The book is so great. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The way you've been talking about it, they went back where they came from, where they moved around. The
Not
Vikings
always.
were like the Romans. They came and conquered.
But so not always, they did have camps. This is very common in the Mediterranean to set up camps that sometimes could last a dozen years. So on the coasts of Italy, as late as the 15th century, there were places that were essentially pirate coves, pirate dens. They would settle, but they weren't, like you, to your point, Margaret, they weren't bringing their families, they weren't setting up shop, but they were
Now, eventually the
colonies.
Vikings do that sort of thing, and they do set up some settlements in England and stuff. But for the most part, you know, it's what Max says. They're coming in, and eventually they go, oh, okay, well, you know, maybe we can settle down some. There was supposed to be, you've heard about the Republic of Pirates in the Bahamas. They were going to have their own pirate nation. I just don't think they ever could have really cooperated enough to do something like that. And the thing about captains, the difference between a pirate captain and a naval captain, the naval captain could just beat people at will, and it would take a mutiny. And if you mutinied, you were probably going to be hung. With a pirate, if you were a crummy captain, i.e. you weren't getting a lot of loot, they could vote you out. And you served as long as you were a good provider for the ship.
But you wouldn't walk the plank.
No, you would not do that. So,
ultimately, they would have to pull into port and get provisions and such. So, or not, or is that
no,
a false
no.
assumption?
You brought this up. I've got a student doing a thesis looking at all the animal bones off the Queen Anne's Revenge and trying to figure out, could they pull in a provision, or could they steal stuff off of other ships? I think it was a hodgepodge. I think that some of the ships probably could, you know, they could pull into North Carolina and we'd say, you bet, you know, whatever you want. But in other places, maybe less so.
No, the reason I asked that is it would require some government complicity if they did.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's certainly what was going on in North Carolina.
We have one question from the audience. Time for one more question. Okay, yeah, go ahead.
No, just a quick comment. That was Franklin's Navy, Benjamin Franklin's Navy organized ports where privateers could pull in, get provisions along the European, the continental coast.
All right, well, let's put our hands together for Dr. Charlie Ewen,
and Dr.
Beth Gardner, Paul Bonici. Thank you for humoring me, giving you everything I knew about Barbary pirates. Next week we have a wonderful seminar on labor, race, and human rights in North Carolina. That's for our Juneteenth seminar. Line up, get involved. Humanities.unc.edu. We'll see you next time.
All right.